Hello there, my dear. If you're a woman of color and you struggle with perfectionism as you move through the writing process, you may not know that it can actually be wielded in powerful ways for you to be able to do the work that you know you're here to do. In this video, I'm going to share some simple ways to really work with and love your perfectionism so it can be your greatest asset in the process of writing. So let's get into it. I want to preface all of this with this idea that often perfectionism is one of those things that's sometimes seen as really good, right? People say, oh, how do I say this? Like people imagine that it's actually something they benefit from because it means that then you put out quality and amazing work out in the world, right? So if you take on perfectionism and you use it to move through stuff, then sometimes that's seen as like a positive trait because all of a sudden people know slash you know whatever you put out is going to be good, right? But I struggle with that. Because when you allow perfectionism to lead the path ahead, no matter what you're doing, but specifically in regards to writing, it comes at a great sacrifice to you, your body, the labor and the effort and the time that you're putting in to the writing. It's sort of like you're pushing up against a boulder because you're so particular about how you want something to be done writing wise that you're putting in and exerting an exorbitant amount of energy that then keeps you from actually two things, enjoying it and actually managing your energy better, right? Because we all have a million things to do in our lives. As much as I love writing, there are other people in my life, communities I'm a part of, right? So just from like an energy management standpoint and your heart, even though perfectionism is something, I mean, for a long time, I had imagined, oh, this is a good thing. It makes me show up in the world in this like amazing way that I feel really in integrity to. Like, it also came at a great harm to my well-being. And so that's what I want to remind you of as we move into this, is that two things can be true, right? And as we move through our session today, I want you to see the ways in which perfectionism may be used for the greater good of your project and when it's keeping you from actually moving forward with it. So in this first section, I'm going to talk a little bit about the real problem with perfectionism when we allow it to take over our writing projects. Often it's coming in a little too soon and not letting you get to the writing you're supposed to be doing, right? You're trying to make something just right, like at a time when you really should just be worried about creating enough writing and getting enough of the project complete and gathering the momentum and the steam to move through it and complete it rather than getting stuck in like, oh, it needs to be this way. Usually perfectionism will come in early on in the project or in the middle of the project, and it's going to keep you from actually gathering enough momentum to move through it, which is a problem, right? Because perfectionism is good at certain points in the project, but when you don't have a full project yet, you don't have a full piece, it's kind of pointless. It's just keeping you from doing anything, which is the worst thing, right? As I said before, it also takes away from the process of enjoying creativity altogether. So stick with me in these metaphors that I have. For me, I genuinely believe perfectionism can't always exist alongside and in development of creativity. I believe perfectionism stifles creativity. So it's sort of like if creativity were a burning fire, perfectionism becomes the water. It puts it out. And sort of I feel like it can't exist. It's too limiting. It's constricting. And I mean, I could go on and on about metaphors and how the fire is also a symbol of the passion and the love that you have for the thing you're creating, and perfectionism comes in to wipe it, right? Because it's insistent on it existing in a certain way before you even know what the project is, right? Also, it can also manifest as a way of, I believe that sometimes perfectionism can also clog you up creatively. So yeah, I'm talking about like constipated, like creatively constipated, which is like the most frustrating feeling, right? Because you're there and you're excited and you have the things on your mind and you know what you want to share. And then like perfectionism is keeping you from expressing it and getting it out, right? And so I'm here to share with you one, to suffer from perfectionism isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world. And two, you can begin to appreciate it and the ways it can support you in the writing process if you know when to leverage it, when to bring it in, right? Because I do think and I imagine they're engineers, architects. There's like certain things, like, there are things that are important that they be to a certain level and extent of quote unquote perfection. And I also believe that of the writing process, that there's a certain moment in which refinement is needed, whether or not that's needed when you might be bringing it in, I imagine it is not, right? I truly believe that we can leverage this part of us that is really intent on things being a certain way for our highest and greatest good when we apply it to the right phase in the process of writing, right? And so, um, the only way we can do that is if we approach it with a whole lot of love. I'm going to come in with the hokey because I'm a warm person and I love writing. And so I'm going to anchor into love for the rest of this. I hope that you will stick with me through that because to me love is not just saying love, but it's considering what are the acts of love that get you to move through these particular moments of perfectionism that are keeping you from doing the writing that you know you want to do. Um, so when one of the bigger and simpler ways I maneuver through perfectionism and help others with is I try to get a real sense of where it's coming from. Like what familial, societal, cultural, or otherwise things in your life experience required this of you and for what reason, right? And is it required any longer? Why or why not? That's one of the biggest questions I ask myself, right? Because often perfectionism is rooted in some really deep emotional stuff. And once you face it, once you're with it, because just because you're, yeah, once you face it and once you're with it, you have to notice, like, is this the way you need to exist in order to live your life, in order to complete your writing projects? Usually the answer is probably not required any longer, right? Usually. In certain areas it might be based on what your profession is. And the third question I asked myself was like, who could help me to support me on this journey to healing this part of myself? Because if perfectionism is coming up in the writing process, that means it's probably leaking in all different parts of your life in different ways, right? That may or may not be fully, like you may or may not be fully aware of. But I find it very odd if perfectionism were just to show up in regards to writing. That is usually not the case, right? The way we do one thing is often how we do a lot of things, right? Um, and who could you ask for some support as you choose to actively engage with these, with perfectionism, right? Because we don't have to do it alone. Reminder, you shouldn't do it alone. And as I conclude this particular section about how I tend to move through being with this level of perfectionism that can come up when I'm in the writing process, I try to remember like societal context too. So I recently read this book about perfectionism. I forget what the title is. If you want to know what it is, just comment below and I'll find it and figure it out for you. But this author is a woman and she makes an amazing point, which was so important for me because I studied gender and I was a feminist and gender studies student through a couple of degrees, right? And so she reminded me that men are usually in the US not seen as bad if they suffer with perfectionism. Actually, it turns out that society will, and many folks will be like, oh no, it's okay for them, for that person. Why? Because they're like, they get to be like the mad scientist, the gifted one that nobody understands, right? But they contribute amazing things to the world. So like we think it's okay and we sort of deal with it, right? And we don't make it seem like it's anything bad. But when women are seen struggling with perfectionism, um, it's not seen nearly as positively, right? It's we're seen as controlling, as masculine, right? Like we're not seen as gifted and wonderful. Um, and she gave a really good example of Martha Stewart, which was fascinating. And it reminded me of like, oh, gender also comes in here. Um, and so I want to remind you that there are a lot of things around you that are contributing to your overall experience navigating perfectionism. And it'll be good for you to explore that as you consider how it may impact your writing, because there's a few different components with it. All right, it's that time in the video where we stop, drop, and write because we honor the importance of being intentional and taking some time to reflect. And so today, I invite you to consider what loving your perfectionism could look like and feel like in your writing process. Like, what could you do when you see it arise? What are the ways that you could begin to partner with it rather than fight so much against it? Juicy questions. You're welcome to write to them. You're welcome to just consider them and walk with them and take a breather because those are big questions that we will explore in this video, BT Dubs. But if you're here and you don't know who I am, I'm Dr. Raquel. I help visionary women of color who carry so much for their communities move from only writing things that are expected, which are educational, polished, and professional writing, to courageously sharing the personal stories that reflect their full lived experiences so they can inspire others and make the impact they're here to make. If you've liked this video thus far, then make sure to hit subscribe and let's move on. So, these are some ways that I have found I can love and heal my relationship with perfectionism. Stick with me. I've only got there's like three yummy ones here. The first is to see perfectionism as your vehicle and avenue to love the project even more. So, if you're being particular about the project, that means you're invested in it. And the way back further into your project is to explore the way you can honor your love for the project, right? Perfectionism doesn't come up necessarily when we don't give a shit about stuff. It usually comes up because we want this thing to be good and we're concerned about how other people might see it. And so we're like, oh my goodness. And usually perfectionism is coming from a space of something we deeply care about. And if you're invested in writing and you're on this channel, then I'm assuming you're invested and interested in pursuing writing. Um, and so I encourage you to lean into that. If perfectionism arises, then it's a reminder you wow, I really care about this, right? Ooh, how can I honor what perfectionism is bringing up for me here as I move forward with this project, right? So if the perfectionism is speaking to you about the structure of something or the way that something is written, you can be like, I hear you, right? I can honor the idea that I want to make this just right. Let me get back to that when I'm done writing the idea. And it can be that simple too. And it takes a little bit of a muscle and exercise to do it. I also sometimes have handy dandy notebook or notes. And whenever something is brought up and I'm in the middle of this juicy thing and then perfectionism comes in and it's like, but what about this? I'm like, it's not the time for that, but I hear you and I'm gonna write it down. Right? So often when I'm writing, for me, it'll be like, oh my God, you've said that word 5 times. Can you stop already? I'm like, I hear you. I make a note above on the document, look for repetitive words. These are the words I'm gonna look for. One of my repetitive words is just. 500 times I will say just, right? Um, and so when my perfectionism comes in, I'm like, I honor, I'm like, oh, I hear you. I can't stop writing this beautiful thing I'm writing because I'm excited about it, but you're right. Let me just jot that note down and then I can go back, right? I don't make it necessarily mean anything bad. Like, oh my God, I'm repeating all these words and all this stuff. I'm like, I'm not gonna go down that rabbit hole. What I am gonna go down is like, oh, you really want to make sure this is clear writing and I'm not repeating the same words so much. Good point. I'm gonna create this box and we're gonna put down all the words, right? So whenever it comes up, honor it, honor that insight and that feedback from your perfectionism and see where it's coming from. Is it because it wants to make sure that the writing is as clear as possible? Is it because it wants to make sure that it lands in the best way possible with people? Then honor it, write down its feedback and tell I'm going to get back to you later. Because the entry further in and away from letting perfectionism guide the project is to lead with love always. Because if you're here, I'm sure you're here because you want to do this in a loving way. All right, the second way that I have figured out how to move through my journey with perfectionism as I write is I don't demonize the trait just to get it right. So, what does that mean? Um, I wonder. I move into wonder and consider what else does being perfectionistic really have to offer me in this project? What can I really call on? When can I really call on it in the writing process, right? So instead of making perfectionism this really bad thing and saying it's not good for me and I need to remove it in its entirety, the truth is I am who I am and I do like things to be just so. And I am working on being more present and allowing myself to be open to that. But in this moment, what I always like to consider is like, where can perfectionism be welcomed in? Where it's going to be like, yeah, let's go for it, right? Like, let it come in and let it have a show. And I'm being serious, right? Because if you're holding it back all the time, it's exhausting, right? So in that last example, I said, oh, I wrote a list of all the things it's telling me about. I was like, okay, so when I'm ready to go revise or edit, then I can go to the list and I can be meticulous as heck as I want about it, right? For me in my dissertation, it was at the end where I had to be meticulous in citing all the sources and organizing them a certain way and making appropriate citations. Like that is the perfect place for my perfectionism to go wild because I need it to be particular then, right? I need it to help me make sure I've covered everything I need to do, right? I also love to bring my perfectionism in when I'm done writing the thing. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna give I also like to give it a time limit. It doesn't get to run amok. It gets 30 minutes. Sometimes it gets an hour based on how big it is. And I'm like, okay, we can come in for 30 minutes and we're just gonna look at this blog post. And these are the three things we're gonna look for. Grammar, repetitive words, clarity of ideas, and that's it. Like we're going in and we can go like real particular, like let's go play. That's where perfectionism loves to play in the midst of the details. Like get lost in the details. Place a time limit and allow it to go there. And remind that voice of perfectionism that comes in like, oh yeah, we're gonna get to you. And do get to it. Just do not spend an exorbitant amount of time on it. Right? I also would imagine that another supportive component of perfectionism based on your writing project is creating a system that allows it to feel really good. Right? So for me, my perfectionism can can come in and help me create the most detailed system ever. You know why? Because it helps me later. Right? So when I was writing my care book and transition and moving things from my brainstorming book into like my Google Doc world, it was like very particular. It was like, okay, we're gonna have one doc that literally just transcribes everything you wrote in your notes. And then this doc gets to create order out of it. And you're gonna create different sections. And this section is gonna be the chapters, and this section is gonna be ideas, and this section is gonna be for this, right? So I let my perfectionism come on in and help me out when I need that kind of help. And then that first method I asked you before, and before this one, I give it a lot of love when I'm in the midst of a time in which it's not welcome, right? For me, uh, perfectionism is not welcome at the beginning of the process. It's not welcome in the middle of it. But it sure is welcome in when I have to refine, revise. I have to figure out how to present this to someone else. Like sometimes it can come in really yummy ways. But you have to decide for yourself when do you want it to come in and lead the way because it does have a really good function at certain points in the writing process. And for me, when it comes to organization and it comes to making order, like it's amazing, right? And then the last way I would encourage you to move through and love and be with your perfectionism is to let it be the learning. Like let perfectionism be the place of learning. So my dissertation 300 pages. I remember I got it printed because I wanted it in a hard book cover. And I looked at it and I realized like in the first 20, 30 pages, there's like half a page where I repeat information that's already been said before then. I literally, in the midst of revising this 300-page document, I forgot to delete an old version of the paragraph. And I'll be honest, I could be ashamed of that. Right? My perfectionism would lead me to be ashamed of that. But where could we lead the perfectionism to a place of learning with it? Maybe this is also the fact of writing a 300-page dissertation and doing it mostly by myself. Right? I had my mentors who would look over stuff, but they weren't editors. They didn't go through in some sort of meticulous way, right, to look at all the pages. And so I took on a lot. My dissertation didn't have to be no 300 pages. Um, uh, and so I took on a lot. And so what did that teach me? It taught me that, well, one, I took on a lot, and I also took on a lot in a particular timeline. Like I was insistent on graduating by a certain time. I could have taken a whole other year, but I was like, nah, I'm done with this. I'm like pushing through, and I pushed through, and it came at great sacrifice to my health and my well-being. Um, and what it revealed to me, and as I have conversations with perfectionism and consider my perfection, I'm like, oh, this is what happens when I don't have help, right? At looking at the meticulous stuff, when things are on a tight timeline, when I'm doing something that I don't really love because it was a requirement for school and for me to get a degree. I mean, there's certain parts of the dissertation I think I put up with that project as best I could and I made it my own, but it's not the thing that I feel like I'm here to do. And so when I say let it be the learning, I mean, let it be the moment of learning with perfectionism. Like, if a quality project really matters to me and the project is going to be so long and I'm going to be forced to do it on a timeline because I'm just insistent on it, then what's the learning that I get to have with perfectionism? Like, do we get to bring someone in to support us? Do we have to break up the project a certain way so we're looking at certain components to make sure it's right and true? Also, could we just accept that maybe there will be mistakes and no one is going to think less of us? There aren't going to be less sales of it. It doesn't mean there's going to be less of an impact because we get to be human, right? So, those are the three ways I encourage you to walk in your journey with perfectionism. First is acknowledge it, honor it for the love that you have for the project. Two, don't demonize it, allow it to come in when it's meant to, and let it run the show when it's time for it to run the show. And three, let it also be a learning. Things aren't going to always be perfect, but if we want them to be as good as possible, sometimes we have to open ourselves up to what it requires of us, right? And perfectionism can come in to sort of guide our journey with that of like, what would I do differently next time that I didn't do quite right? And let it be the guide to learning, not from a place of I have to get it right, but from the place of like love of I want to get this right because it matters to me, not because I have to, right? And I think that's the beauty of also considering and the work that you get to do, right? Because you're watching this video. When you interact and you're with other people, that's the beauty of perfectionism also can't also breeds very well by itself, but it doesn't breed that well when you're in community with other people. And so I want to invite you to join me in my membership, the Writing Corner, because it does all these things we've been talking about throughout this video. The main premise of the membership is to help women of color to change their relationship with writing so that you're excited to do that, so it feels joyful, so that you're proud of what you put out there, and you're not sitting here continuing to push, feeling like you have to do things a certain way in order to get things a certain place. I imagine the best writing in the world doesn't really come from that place. At least not like soul, heart gripping work, right? And in the community, we do this through various prompts that I give on a weekly basis and every month, where it gets you to slow down and be like, ooh, like sort of how I mentioned throughout this video, shifting or changing your relationship with perfectionism. I support you with changing your relationship with writing so that you're not seeing it as this thing that create so much tussle or guilt or a lot of really heavy feelings, but that rather you enter it into this relationship with writing in a really sovereign and responsible way where you get to support each other in a reciprocal manner to do the work that you're here to do. And so we do that in a couple of ways. One, there's a mini course where you set up an intentional writing practice. And by mini course, I mean it's a mini course, it's like an hour and 15 minutes. Um, and it helps you set up your writing practice and your intention so that you can show up to writing in the way you want, in the place you want, so you can do the writing you're meant to do. And then there are prompts that I post in the community every week that help you be able to reflect on your relationship with writing and begin to shift and change it. Like recently, someone in the membership was like, "Oh, I imagined the other day, like, what if my relationship with writing was like looking forward to a really amazing date with someone?" So, ooh, what if it gets to be exciting in that way, right? Like, let's consider different ways to be in relationship with writing than the very tenuous one that we may feel when we sit down to write, where there are ideas or, you know, our perfectionism may come up or other things, right? In the community, we also have really supportive live gatherings that help you feel and see the ways that doing writing more intuitively, um, where it's like anchored and comes from your heart is really easeful and doesn't actually require nearly as much revision or energy as you imagine, right? In our sacred writing circles, you can get to the juicy nugget of what you have to say without thinking so hard about it, without focusing so much on your brain and what you feel like it has to share, but getting down and distilling it to what the heart really wants to communicate. And with our sacred writing circles and our virtual retreats, you can begin to see how quickly you can like make progress and get to things a lot faster so that you can kick perfectionism into its appropriate place where it's meant to be and sort of throw away the idea that something has to be really good before it's done, right? Something that I we find really supportive in the community for me, it's always about timing. So sometimes I set a timer in all our live gatherings and you only have so much time to do something because it really helps with perfectionism in the sense that you just get to it when you only have 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. You don't sit there and spend a bunch of time deleting and writing, deleting and writing. You're like, nope, this is the amount of time I have, what's coming up, and you go, right? I've seen it time and time again with folks in my community when there's a timer placed on there and they're in community with one another. There's a less of an impetus to try to figure out how to get it right rather than just get it on the page. And as we talked about in this video, that's important, right? Because perfectionism coming in before you're able to even express it keeps you from actually saying what you're meant to say. Also, in the membership, as you keep showing up for writing, you'll notice and begin to activate your own unique writing voice so that you can hear it and you can enjoy listening to it. So much so that perfectionism doesn't get to come in with its nitty-gritty voice and run the show. That instead your heart hears it and you anchor in, and the way you want to show up to the page is so much more, I feel like, soul aligned. And the way the community does that is that we witness and reflect back to you what your beautiful writing does for us, right? I think we often forget that even as we write in silos and by ourselves, like there's something lost there. And so in our community, our intimate community for writing, um, with other women of color, you can immediately see, right, when you share your work with other people, the impact it has on them, the ways that it's getting them to think about and consider something differently, um, and all of it helps you be able to see something reflected back to you so that you can gather the confidence to share your amazing writing and your work with the world. So, if you're interested in joining us, then click the link below um, and commit 90 days to a different, much more intuitive way, kind, graceful, loving way of writing that comes with a lot more support. And remember, I say 90 days because writing is a muscle. And what that means is we need to show up enough for it. I don't think we need to have a million reps, but we need to have some on a regular basis, right? For us to like be moved into a different relationship with writing. So we show up with it differently. It's kind of hard to do within a couple of weeks. And so if that speaks to you and you know you're looking for a wonderful space with other women of color who get it, who are ready to share themselves and who are ready to put their stories on the page because they're ready to make the impact they know they're here to make, then click the link and I'll see you in the writing corner.